looking at their houses, it's devastating.
Oh, watch your feet, mate. That bridge is going. Watch your feet.
It's almost 2 years on.
New Zealand has declared a national emergency after Cyclone Gabrielle.
Since that 1 in 100 year event called Cyclone Gabrielle.
Culture industry and cropping have been terribly affected. We have cropping land down the back here with bosstocks, and it's just hammered, just absolutely hammered.
New Zealand's fruit bowl was devastated. So, NBR wanted to find out how well businesses have recovered, and are they prepared in case it happens again. Welcome to the NBR Podcast. I'm your host, Simon Shepherd. This week, the NBR has been investigating how Hawke's Bay is rebuilding.
The speed of the water was unbelievable.
We had over 700 mils of water came over the height of the stop bank.
Look, it was pretty intense, and I think in the moment you don't really realize what you're doing and where things are going to come up.
Those voices are just some collected by senior journalist Jono Mitchell and content producer Joseph Hisayasu. They spent a week on the ground to understand the heartbreak, the rebuild, and the optimism.
In some parts of Napier and Hawke's Bay, it's recovered really well. You could never even tell that there had been, a natural disaster on the scale that there had been. But there are also areas, just maybe 10, 15 minutes drive out of the sort of central city that haven't been touched basically since the event actually occurred.
Yeah.
So they've just been written off by the owners and by insurance or whatever. So we rocked up to a house in an area called Pakawai that had been completely ruined by the cyclone. And we met the owners who said, look, I've written it off, you're welcome to go in and with a camera and take a look around.
Right.
And it was, it was as if it was the day after the disaster. It was really sort of grim and confronting, like the carpets were covered in silt and mud, sort of cracked, like the bottom of a dry riverbed,
Yep.
There were holes in the walls and smashed windows and tattered curtains blowing in the wind. And obviously the family that had been living there had evacuated in a hurry because there were kids' toys just sort of strewn across the place and soft toys face down in the mud. So that was very confronting.
So that moment in time had been frozen and you just stepped back into it.
Yeah, it was quite emotional, honestly. I remember coming out of the house and having to sit in the car and sort of thinking geez, it was
Right.
very heavy.
Okay.
Because the other thing that really struck me is everything is grey. It all looks sort of sepia toned, and it's just because everything's covered in this sort of thin film of dust and mud. It's sort of.
So the dust from the silt is still just covering the region.
It's like it's leached all the colour out of it. Yeah.
Wow, and for such a vibrant region, such a horticultural region. Jono, did you come across emotions that were still raw?
Yeah, well, I think following on from Joseph's comments about that house in Pakawai, I think we filmed the Pakawai Bridge, which was destroyed, cut in half, and I hadn't been back to that spot in over 2 years, and just to see, empty gap in the middle, a bridge I used to travel through, growing up in Hawke's Bay regularly on a weekly basis was pretty confronting, as Joseph said. And I also think first day filming we were in Eskdale, which was really hard hit. Like Pakawai, there are pockets where there's still a lot of damage and destruction, buildings destroyed, but there are also areas where there were growth. Over the road, a new stop bank had been built to protect trees. So there was a mixture. It just, 5 minutes up the road, you saw destruction still, 2 years on almost, and then another 5 minutes you saw, new fruit trees in an area.
Right. And obviously you were there to talk to business. Now, when you talk to those business, Joseph, did somebody stick out to you as someone who had been through a lot and when they were recounting it, it was still, they were still suffering a bit of trauma, I guess?
Yeah.
Or are they resilient? Have they pushed past it?
I think it's a thing of for everybody that has to have gone through that kind of experience, it must have been incredibly traumatic, right? And, everyone we talk to, I think, did get a little bit emotional in parts, right? Because I mean, it was really clear that this has affected people in really, different but really severe ways. We were talking to sort of, orchardists who'd lost entire groves of fruit trees, and we were talking to people that had their sort of factories completely destroyed. But I mean, also, because I've been going through all this interview to edit it and cut it all down, you really get a sense that these are very sort of pragmatic and practical people. I think, we spoke to some farmers who sort of said that, like working in the horticulture agricultural sector is like problem solving is just kind of what they do, and crisis management is just kind of what they do.
And Joseph, we can't forget about Joseph, we can't forget about Cam Taylor, who rescued over 150 people with his crew, and that was a really raw, emotional interview. I think I went through it about 5 times, and I could feel that emotion, the tears in my eyes, just listening to him recount those terrible first few days.
And it's your community, it's your neighbours, it's your farmers. So I knew, 50-60% of them. So it was pretty. Some of them, you had to take control, real strong actions, just to, and some just needed a cuddle. Basically, you just had to read the situation. For me, what we saved, over 150 people. So yes, there was people we couldn't save, but hey, if I wasn't there, so it was devastating basically. So we're in the air for four days, so flying people.
Cam Taylor was not the only local who leapt into action. The NBR also talked to Shah Aslam from Air Napier.
We moved a total of about 2,000 passengers in that 2-week period. I think it was total 6 pregnant moms who came down to Napier with us. And, we're fortunate to fly them back with their little wee ones back up to Wairau in a safe manner.
And Joseph, having been through all the footage, what do you take away about the resilience of what you found down there?
Yeah, we've got hours and hours and hours of material, and I felt almost quite bad cutting out bits of it, you know? And I think it's hard to overemphasize how complex the recovery is. There's so many different aspects and facets to it, right? Like we were talking to Lucy Leighton, who is the CEO of the Hawke's Bay Regional Economic Development Agency. And she was sort of saying that, if you look at any singular aspect of the recovery, there's so many different, parts to it, right? Like they've got to rebuild all of their roads and they've got to make them more resilient, right? Yeah. Well, that comes in the context of, we've already got problems trying to build roads just anywhere, regardless of whether or not they've been torn up by cyclone. Yeah. And the roads affect all kinds of different businesses in all kinds of different ways, right? Yeah. Yeah. And, if you take that and then imagine that every single aspect of that rebuild is
yeah, it's multifaceted and extremely complex. Jono, was there, when we're talking of business recovery, who stood out to you as having managed to get on top of it reasonably quickly and get up and going again?
Well, a couple of businesses spring to mind. I think Ziwi, as I mentioned earlier, sprung back to action within 5 months. I think they were hand packaging in those early days. But it's not cheap. I just want to follow on from Joseph. The recovery, being resilient, isn't cheap. Panpac, for example, spending over $300 million. Ziwi opening a $100 million facility. Ravensdown are spending tens of millions of dollars. They're all thinking about how to be resilient in the future now, building up stock banks. I think Stuart Irvine at Ziwi talked about a physical barrier within that Awatoto industrial residential area. Those are all conversations that are happening right now. But yeah, this recovery, billions of dollars, yeah.
But things may be looking up. This week, an economic indicator for the region, Napier Port, released its full-year results, and they were good. Todd Dawson is the CEO. You must be happy with the annual results. Net profit after tax up almost 50%, revenue up 16%. What's been the main driver behind this?
Yeah, no, we are happy with the result. The main driver of those is really the recovery that we've seen post-cyclone in our core cargo base. That's the food and fibre that comes out of the Hawke's Bay. We've seen the recovery of horticulture volumes, a lot of the refrigerated cargo that comes through the port, whether that be apples, meat, other fresh produce, as well as the recovery of our forestry customers as well, that are linked into the forestry industry. So your pulp and timber industries, Panpac being a big customer of ours, building back post-cyclone. Those volumes, and of course the return of the cruise industry. In the last year, we saw a record number of cruise ships come back through the port post the COVID years. So so I think across those main trades, we've seen the volume recovering and those revenues increasing.
Right,
been really positive. Yeah.
And after such disruption, not only as you say with Gabrielle, but also with COVID, it must have been sort of gratifying and almost a bit of relief seeing this happen this year.
We've had a few tough years, that's for sure. Port's got pretty good at responding to adversity. I think it has shown that there's a real resilience in the cargo base and in the team as well, and their ability to respond. And we thought I'd talk about the fact that the port's become quite dynamic and how we use our resources in response to the situations that we've faced. But I think it also shows that once volumes recover, the base capability within the port to produce good results, strong operating leverage once those volumes comes back, is certainly there, and that's what we've seen through in this result.
And good news for eligible employees as well. I mean, the results mean that they're in line for a cash and share package worth more than $2,200. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We've had an employee recognition scheme operating at the port for a long time. And since the IPO as well, we've really encouraged employees to become shareholders. When we did the IPO 5 years ago, just over 97% of our employees became shareholders. So we have a strong belief that when the port does well, we should share that with our employees also. And it gives them skin in the game as well, longer term. And it's nice to be able to share some of that benefit back with the team that actually produce it.
Nearly 2 years on since Gabrielle, how would you describe not only the morale of your workforce, but also the community that you interact with?
Since Gabrielle, obviously immediately in the aftermath of Gabrielle, the region was pretty down in the dumps. But it's been good to see in the last wee while the optimism coming back into the region, certainly investment coming back into the region. There's a real bounce in the step coming back into the Hawke's Bay, which is really nice to see. And there's still some subdued markets internationally that a lot of our products go to. But we can sense that there is a sense of optimism coming, which is really good to see.
But still lots of challenges ahead. And let's talk about one of those, and that was the closure of the Winston Pulp's 2 mills. Now, I understand that their exports were perhaps worth up to 7 or 8% of earnings for the port. That's quite a big chunk. How is the port faring with that?
Yeah, it certainly took a bit of the gloss off the end of the last financial year, and a real shame to see a business like WPI exit the New Zealand manufacturing market. And it's something that we've had to respond quite quickly to. We've had to do a bit of restructuring internally inside the business around roles and things that were directly linked to that business, which is a shame. But equally, offsetting some of that as well is the similar to what we saw with Panpac during the cyclone or aftermath of the cyclone, where the mill was closed. It's like this, the mill's closed, and so therefore the logs that would have been going to the mill are now coming directly to the port. So there's a bit of offset there from the pulp and timber that was coming is now being replaced by logs, plus some restructuring around costs. That gives us confidence about our trajectory in terms of earnings growth in the future as well.
So in terms of that restructuring, there was reporting that it was going to affect about perhaps 20 jobs at the port. Is that process finished? Have you lost 20 jobs, or have you managed to reabsorb those positions into other roles?
There's been a mixture. We have lost some roles in the port. Overall, across the whole port, we looked at about 27 to 28 roles in total. A variety of different roles in there. Some of them were vacant roles. But all up, around about 20 roles were, in terms of people, were actually impacted. And a lot of those people we also were able to redeploy into other vacant roles. It's a tough and challenging process to go through, but we have completed that now.
Right.
So that's good.
So what was the net loss in the end?
Approximately 11 roles in total in terms of actual people leaving the port.
That's a little tough after having had the disruption of the last couple of years, and then you're just getting back up to your feet again. You've got a major customer like that going under and affecting the port's operations. So how are you supporting staff through that?
Yeah, look, we've been as open and transparent through the process as we possibly can, supporting people through opportunities to look at other roles and redeployment, retraining, etc. And just trying to focus around, how do we support our people and our teams across the port and their families as well. So just doing as much as you can with a bit of empathy, but equally, thinking about what the future holds too. How do we position the port for the future based on what we could see coming, and ensuring that there is opportunities for people in the future to be a part of the port's business as well.
What about what Kiwi Rail is doing? So they're cutting back driver positions which are based in Napier. Are you concerned that there's going to be less capacity for product to come through the port?
Yeah, look, Kiwi Rail's also in that sort of position where they're really looking at their business, looking at their cost base, having to make some tough decisions. They've obviously had a pretty tough couple of years as well with their results. And they're getting a lot of focus from the government currently about what sort of returns they're making on their business. So we've got a very strong partnership with Kiwi Rail. They've given us surety that the support for the Napier to Palmerston North section of the line is still very strong, and we're working actively with Kiwi Rail to make sure that we got long-term volumes aligned to the use of that line. So we're working with them to try and convert more cargo from road onto rail, and that process is going successfully.
It's a codependent relationship between the port and the rail there, isn't it? You really need each other.
It's a vital link, and we really are strong supporters of Kiwi Rail in the New Zealand environment.
I guess the long-term bigger challenge is climate change. Did the port's infrastructure get or suffer much damage from Cyclone Gabrielle? And if not, what are you doing to mitigate that in the future?
During the storm, yes, we saw some amazing weather coming through. Waves we measured up to 15, 20 metres high at that time through that storm. And we suffered a little bit of damage. To our breakwater, where some of the what we call acmons, basically the big concrete blocks that go on the outside, moved around and needed to be replaced. A bit of infill in our channel as well from the big swells. But actually, the port got off very, very lightly. We were up and running 2 or 3 days after that storm, so that was good in terms of how the port handled that. In terms of future, climate resilience, we've just actually published another report recently as part of our annual results around our climate change risk assessments and things, and we're always looking at what are those things indicating to us, and how can we build resilience into our infrastructure. But it is it's at this stage I would say it's more of an art than a science, because if someone can tell me actually what the sea level is going to be in 10, 15, 20 years time, then we'll build something going to be to that sort of level. But the movement in the data and the science is quite fluid every couple of years, and so we're just doing what we can with the information that we have as well around building resilience into our existing infrastructure.
So hard to plan for the future when you don't have predictable data, I guess.
That's right.
Looking forward, great results. Is that purely due to pent-up demand post-cyclone, or do you think this is sustainable?
Oh, absolutely, it's sustainable. I think we've just shown, through all that adversity and change that we've had over the last 3 or 4 years, the fundamental core cargo base is very resilient coming in and out of Napier Port. So I think that base is growing and is continuing to be invested in.
Can we look at Napier Port as a barometer of the financial health for the region?
Absolutely. There's a real symbiotic relationship between the port and the region. When the port does well, the region does well, and vice versa. And so, that's clearly very evident.
So, Jono, Napier Port is sounding positive. They've had, good results. But surely it doesn't mean that cleaning up after Gabrielle is done and dusted. There must be just so many challenges facing everybody down there.
Yeah, well, I think as part of this series, I wanted to end the week on a bit of optimism as well. And our final story on Friday is talking about growth and the future. We've got Craigmore Sustainables, which has bought new orchards in Hawke's Bay. They're banking on investment in that region and growth for the future. Also, Tumu Timbers, which is a local company, they're looking at new opportunities to export overseas. So I think that's a chance to sort of go, okay, we've been through this traumatic, huge event. We've rebuilt, we've recovered to some extent, nearing 100%. What are we going to do next? So a lot of decisions now are about how do we grow, what do we do next? But in terms of what the government is up to, we spoke with Mark Mitchell, the Emergency Management and Recovery Minister. He's reinforcing official reports into the cyclone and extreme weather events that, the emergency management system is not fit for purpose. So I asked him, okay, how's it going to be improved? What's going to happen next time? He's saying, while there are great people on the ground in times of crisis, not everyone has a quite defined role, so he wants to make sure that legislation defines people's role so they all work in harmony off the same song sheet, so to speak. So that's what the government's priority is at the moment, is improving the emergency management system. So the next big event will be handled a lot better.
And just sort of wrapping up, could you sort of... it's very hard to summarise. You can't generalise. Obviously, there's pockets of recovery and there's pockets still of devastation, as you have seen down there. But from the businesses that you've been talking to in this extensive series, how would you summarise their attitude to the future?
They're resilient. They want to survive, I think. They want to be successful again. And while they've been through a hugely traumatic, life-changing event, they've put people at the heart and their business will thrive again. That's their hope for the future. And I think, survival is key.
And that wraps up this episode of the NBR Podcast. Thanks to my colleagues Jono Mitchell and Joseph Hisayasu. You can read and watch their entire in-depth Hawke's Bay recovery series on nbr.co.nz. Thanks also to content producer Jake Latham for this episode. Links to audio used are in the description. Up next, what's the future hold for TV3 and its owner Warner Brothers Discovery? The company's New Zealand boss sits down for a chat. I'm Simon Shepherd. We'll catch you then.